Let's talk about imposter syndrome for a little while. So you're here, and if you're a mompreneur, it's very likely that you've experienced imposter syndrome for a number of reasons. I can think of two off the top of my head that I experience or have experienced as a mompreneur. The first of those is through the business lens. So as an entrepreneur, not even just mompreneurs, entrepreneurs generally have a very high rate of imposter syndrome. And the problem is we have all of this feedback, fake it till you make it, or we tell ourselves, you just have to learn a little bit more. You just have to do a little bit more. You have to put in a couple more years before you are expert level or whatever you've decided that is. You just have to do more, right? It's always about doing more, learning more, gaining more knowledge. And underneath all of that, telling ourselves that if we just do more, if we just be more, if whatever, is this deep-seated belief that we're really ultimately not the kind of person that can do it. There's the question like, who am I to think that I could do something like that? Who am I to think that I could run a business? I'm just a stay-at-home mom, or I belong in the corporate world, or whatever the case is. And that's your imposter syndrome at work under there, telling you that you're not capable, you're not able, you're not the kind of person who could do this. So first, let me dispel that. That imposter syndrome is a liar. It's showing up for a number of reasons. It's showing up to keep you safe. It thinks it's keeping you safe. That's that fear that's its job. It thinks it's keeping you safe, but what it's really doing is keeping you stuck. And because it was at some point in your life, maybe not just one point, a number of points, it was there, it was ingrained in your head. It's a belief that you've probably carried for a very long time, likely since childhood. So it's very deep-seated and it lives there. And what we need to do is get that bad boy out of here. We need to go ahead and let it know that it no longer lives here. It is not paying rent. It's not contributing to anything good, and it needs to go. So how do we do that? Well, there's a few ways that we can do in the moment. And usually that's what happens. What happens is the inner critic pipes up. And in that moment, we have a whole lot of tools available to us where we can quiet the inner critic. But that's going to keep coming back around. So along with those in the moment activities that we're doing to keep that inner critic quiet and at bay, we also need to be able to do the deep inner work at the root of the issue so that we can start to weed it out and really get from the roots all the way out, just excavate that bad boy. And so that's not something that we can cover here today. That is something that would require a number of sessions. The important thing that you know is it is possible to get it out, to make it go for good. And that what you're left with at the end of that is a whole lot more confidence, a path that you can actually see and believe for your own success and your own journey in a way that feels amazing to you. And now the other way that this imposter syndrome shows up frequently for mompreneurs is through the lens of motherhood. So let's say we're pursuing this business, and inevitably sometimes that business spills over into our life because everybody can't just compartmentalize everything all of the time. That's not realistic. That's not life. And as much as I like things to have their place and their containers and their compartments, the reality is these things are going to spill over. So when you're working on your business, there's often this guilt that creeps in about what you should be doing with your household for your children instead of the work or the business that you're building. And that can creep in and look like, I'm a horrible mother, I don't deserve to be their mother, all sorts of other really horrible things that we can say to ourselves. And where I find imposter syndrome creeping in sometimes is where if I'm not paying attention, I start comparing myself to the other moms around me who on the surface look like they're killing it. And they are. I give credit to all moms where it's due. They are killing it, but that's not to say that they don't have some stuff going on under the surface as well that we don't see. But we're comparing to their highlight reel, right? Like what we see from the outside. We're comparing the deepest, darkest fears that we're carrying to their beautiful surface stuff that we get to see. And that just doesn't equate, number one, and there is no value in that. All that serves to do is break us down, bust us down, feel like we're not worthy and we're not good enough. But it's a thing that happens frequently to so many of us. And so there's a way to deal with that too. And really all of it works together. And so like I said, initially in the moment, what it comes back is to this inner critic. And we don't actually just deal with this, even though the inner critic speaks up very loudly up here in our head. We don't just deal with that inner critic in our head. We deal with the inner critic in our body as well, which allows us to really start to release that energy and that tension that really does live in the body, not just in the head. And so a couple of those things that I'm going to share with you today are some exercises you can do in the moment where you feel that you're getting stressed. And if you're not completely in tune with your body, it's going to feel like or sound like a lot of chaos up here, a lot of angry, negative, mean things being hurled at you from your own brain. And then if you are in tune with your body, what you'll notice is your body is reacting to what's going on during that negative kind of horrible stuff that's being hurled at you. And you're going to be tight or activated somewhere in the body. You may have tension in your shoulders, or you might have that pit in your stomach. And the more you start to pay attention to your body, the more you'll be able to identify what is happening, what's being triggered, and where it lives, and then what kind of attention to that area gives you the relief that you need so that you can move past that moment and build yourself back up to a place where you're doing things that are constructive for you and that you're building your confidence and moving forward instead of staying stuck. So first thing that you can do when the inner critic shows up, or that negative self-talk that shows up in your head, is what we'll call the ABCs. It's easy to remember. So the A is for acknowledge or accept. And that doesn't mean accept what you're being told about yourself as truth, or what you're saying to yourself as truth. What that means is accept that the thought just happened. So instead of battling the thought or fighting the thought, which only serves to create a back and forth, what's going to happen is you acknowledge, okay, that thought happened. Now what can you do with it? So you're doing that without judgment, without having to analyze or pick apart, just a simple that happened. And then you can do the next thing, which is breathe. And this goes back to the things that I always talk about if you've been following me for any amount of time, which is those deep belly breaths. So you're breathing into the diaphragm area, which is kind of between the bottom of the rib cage and the belly button. And so if you're not familiar with this type of breathing, it's relatively simple in nature, but if it's not second nature, it's something that you'll want to focus on in the moment. So if you bring your hand to your diaphragm area, as you breathe in, you're not going to see that many of us do with the shoulder raising and the really tension up here. What you're going to find is your belly will expand. And so you can feel that really well if you place your hand there. And as you're doing those deep belly breaths, you feel that belly expand, you feel your hand kind of push out. And then as you exhale through your mouth, you will find that your belly contracts kind of back towards that spine. And you'll be able to feel that movement. Now, if this is something that you've been doing, you don't really need to put your hand there. You can if it feels good. But if you're just getting started, that's a really great way to see if you are in fact breathing into your belly, or if you're doing that chest breathing that kind of raises in the shoulders and tenses up this area of the body, which is a thing that we absolutely do not want. That also lends itself to stress and anxiety. So we want to keep those breaths in the belly. So I've been talking for a minute about what it is, but it's actually very quick. The belly breaths, you can do probably about 60 seconds worth of those belly breaths. Very intentional, focused on the sensations of the breath as it moves through your body. So as you inhale, you're inhaling through your nose. You're feeling that breath fill you with energy and really push down into the abdomen. And then as you exhale, you can physically experience that release of the muscles and the tension in your body, and just notice what it feels like as you let go. And then as you continue to do that for 60 seconds, you'll continue to feel more and more of that release. When that 60 seconds is up, give yourself a little smile and you move on to the C, which is about the phrase that you were using, the critic talk that was going on. So what that is choose your next thought. Now, this again sounds simple in nature, and with practice, it does become quite simple. But the thing is, if this is a brand new practice to you, and if you've really been battling the inner critic for a long time, it can actually feel very challenging for some. And what that looks like is difficulty coming up with something nice to say about yourself. So the intention is to eventually be able to take whatever phrase it was that you were saying about yourself initially when we identified that inner critic, and to be able to flip it and reframe it. But if that feels like too much of a stretch right now here where you're starting, any phrase in that stepping in that direction will do. And so it's just about progression. Start where you are. Meet yourself right where you are without judgment, and allow yourself to give just that one tiny little step towards the phrase that you would ultimately like to work towards. And then little by little, as it feels appropriate to you, if your body is not responding negatively, and I'll come back to that in just a second and let you know what that looks like. But as long as your mind and your body is responding well to that phrase, you can continue to try to push just a little further towards ultimately what you want to be saying to yourself instead. And so what happens is, if your body your mind hears and your body experiences something that you say that it absolutely cannot get on board with, you're going to feel a tension occur really quickly. And that's an indication that you're potentially not quite ready to make that big of a step towards saying something kind about yourself, maybe the opposite of what you had been saying. So take a step back and offer yourself a new phrase and see how that resonates in your body. And what you'll notice is that if your body and your mind receive it, there's not that tightening of the muscles or that sensation that just feels like tension in the body. And so that is one step. So you're acknowledging, it's one process rather, not necessarily step. There's 3 steps to it, but it is one activity that you can do. So you acknowledge or accept the thought as it happened, you breathe, and then you choose your next thought. And so the next thing that you can do as part of the process to overcome that imposter syndrome and to start to quiet that inner critic, kind of turn the volume down on the inner critic, if you will, is to make a habit of writing down each day. You can do this in the morning or in the evening, preferably when you're not already overwhelmed or stressed or in a space where the inner critic is running wild. So it's helpful to do this particular practice outside of that to start. So what that looks like is writing down, and I do advise that you write with a pen or pencil on an actual piece of paper, something about using the hand and the body to express this thought is particularly impactful. So if you take your pen, paper, and you write down 3 things that you do well. So that can be 3 things that you do well generally, or if at the end of the day, you could do 3 things that you did well that day. And then as you progress in this, doing this each day, you can add on some gratitude to that to bring it even to the next level. But again, this is another thing, you start where you're at. So if doing the gratitude piece of it feels great to you to begin with, then rock on, do it. If it doesn't, focus on the 3 things that you did well. In the moments then later where the inner critic is running wild, you will be able to pull this practice into the moment. But until you have created this and built upon it and made it very secondary in nature to you, that might be a bit more difficult to pull into the moment where that overwhelm has already crept in. So this is why we practice it ahead of time. It becomes more natural to you as you practice it. And in those moments where your mind is clear and your body is at ease, it comes more naturally. So those are 2 really impactful yet very simple things that you can do to start to work towards overcoming that imposter syndrome. And it starts with really working at the inner critic level, but also bringing the body into it where we often don't. However, if you do tend to, then kudos to you, because that is amazing. That's a thing I talk about frequently, and I am celebrating you around that. If it is a thing that you don't do, I am celebrating that you are starting here in this process, and going forward, it is something that you will begin to implement more of. Okay, so that is all I have for you today on digging into the imposter syndrome. If this resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button, share this with your friends, share this with your coworkers, anybody that you know is experiencing imposter syndrome or even self-doubt. This could be majorly impactful for them. Thank you so much for being here with me today, and I will see you on the next video.